Rockingham District 31. That's Auburn, Candia, Chester, and Deerfield. I'm here today with Representative Mark Pearson.
Rockingham 34, Chairman, Children and Family Law, formerly Chairman of Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs Committee.
So kind of the relevant reason why we are sitting here together is because Representative Pearson and I have been members of the HHS Oversight Committee for a couple of terms now. And one of the issues that came up in the prior term was the Boston Globe had published an article that sort of presented New Hampshire in a pretty bad light relative to a physician that practiced in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Massachusetts, their Board of Medicine had done a lot of reporting on this individual's malfeasance. New Hampshire had been relatively quiet, maybe one thing when we're talking about 10 to 20 kind of incidents. So in response to the Boston Globe article and the general public concerns about what we were doing, the chairman of HHS Oversight, Representative Pearson, convened a special committee on taking a look at the Board of Medicine and the kind of reporting that it did. And I would say that what that special committee did was we took about 4 or 5 hearings where we elicited testimony. And one of the things that came out of it from my perspective and that has driven this legislation is that our Board of Medicine was reporting apparently everything it was supposed to report. Everything we had put into the statutes, they were reporting well, right? So how is it that we had not reported these incidents that Massachusetts was? Well, as we dug into it, it was because we found out that if the Board of Medicine, that the Board of Medicine is not aware of the internal disciplinary actions of a particular institution. Let's take, Hospital X located in one of our biggest cities. If they have a physician that's creating some issues that may result in internal discipline, perhaps not doing their reporting on a timely basis, perhaps overprescribing, perhaps, just anything that may send up a red flag at that institution does not report that to the Board of Medicine. And so obviously you can't report what you don't know. And what this motivated were a couple of different bills. This is one of the 2 bills. This is the one that passed the House. I don't believe the other one did. And what I thought we would accomplish with this bill was rather than direct the Board of Medicine to begin collecting and reporting internal hospital disciplinary procedures, which is a possible conclusion of all of this, what I wanted to do was first charge them with the mission, because there's nothing in the statute that tells them they're supposed to be aware of what's going on in the internal disciplinary action. So given that there are public members already on the Board of Medicine, those folks who are supposed to represent us and not just the profession, I assigned to one of them the obligation to be a public transparency advocate, which is not to say what they should advocate other than public transparency. So rather than as an outsider imposing on that board our standards, I wanted to just first start by designating somebody to be a public transparency advocate who would worry the issue of whether or not the board was being sufficiently transparent. And that person should also have a background of doing systems analysis and making recommendations on things like information workflow, that sort of thing. So that is what this bill does. It doesn't cost any more money. It takes an existing person and says, okay, one of you three public people, you have a special charter. You're going to be the public transparency advocate, and this bill doesn't tell them what to do other than to worry the problem of whether or not we're being adequately transparent. And it trusts the Board of Medicine and their collective wisdom to figure out what that really means. It's a board that's operated for over 100 years. It's operated well. You know, this is a tweak to just say, hey, think about something a little bit outside of your historical lane. And that's my testimony. I'll answer questions after.
Thank you. Representative Edwards told me he didn't have written testimony. I do, and it's virtually what he said, which is a real good cooperative thing.
Great minds.
Well, similar minds think alike. One of the things I'd want to add is along the way, there is in process a significant restructuring of OPLC, the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification, and its funding. I've been in touch with Attorney Lindsay Courtney, who is in charge of it, and we discussed the issue of why did the Massachusetts board report 20 occasions of malpractice and the New Hampshire board report none. It's not that the New Hampshire board is made up of bad people. It's, as Representative Edwards said, it's the structure. We want to change the structure. And the OPLC being in flux, I know will help that along as well. However, we felt that House Bill 454 is one that will move the process along irrespective of how the OPLC changes are accomplished.
Thank you both. Questions? Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, representatives. My question is, I'm looking at the examining board records, so beginning on line 28 on page 1, going through page 2. It said that the record shall be made and preserved in accordance with the retention policy established by OPLC. The record shall be public and shall be open to inspection. But where is the information going to be posted? Is it going to be posted on the OPLC website, or is it going to be posted on the Board of Medicine website, or should it be posted on both?
This is something that the redo of OPLC will figure out, at least according to my last conversation with Attorney Courtney.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes?
I would answer it a little bit differently, Senator Carson. I don't disagree with what Representative Pearson would say. I would just admit to you that I no longer remember what RSA 323:7 Roman numeral 3-A says.
Okay.
And so the answer to your question, I'd say 80% chance it's in that RSA. And if it's not, my intent when I was thinking about this during drafting was that the transparency report should be hung next to the Board of Medicine's regular reports. I see this as an adjunct, a supplement, not something distinct.
Okay. Thank you.
Further
Thank you.
questions? Seeing none, thank you both. Let's bring up Shane Goulet from the Board of Medicine.
Good morning, everyone. Shane Goulet, attorney with the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification. I'm counsel for the Board of Medicine. The board takes no position on this particular proposal. It did want to highlight some of the concerns that it might have. The board is very much in favor of public transparency within the confines of their own structure, whether it be 91A or their own specific statute 329. With that being said, the specific things that they identified and authorized me to speak to you all about were regarding the language that's proposed in paragraph 1. Towards the bottom, it's identifying what the public member of the board's role would be. And I'm going to go to the, after the comment, is capable of exercising systems analysis and providing recommendations to improve public transparency of board responsibilities under subparagraph 2, B, and C. That primarily deals with investigations, complaint, process, procedures, all of which is done in non-public session. The disclosure of those minutes would be prohibited under 91A3 and also under 329. So the board just wanted to highlight to what extent that public transparency advocate, a member of the board, could disclose information, because obviously that individual will be prohibited from doing so. Similarly, as it relates to the MRSC, which is the investigative body that the Board of Medicine utilizes as a peer review committee for their complaints that's separate and distinct from the board, they have the same provisions of non-public disclosure as it relates to that information. So being it is the primary responsibility of the Board of Medicine to protect the public, they did just want to identify that without taking any position on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? I guess I'm thinking about what you just said. So the section, subparagraphs 2, B, and C, you know, I should have looked that up, and I didn't. I just kind of read through the bill. But
I can read it if you'd like.
If you got it right there, sure.
Yeah, I do. The board shall B, investigate and evaluate existing licensees through the medical review subcommittee and commence disciplinary action concerning licensees in accordance with the standards of this chapter. So the investigation and evaluation and any determination by the board would be in non-public. When it goes to a formal disciplinary process, a notice of hearing would issue. The assignment of an administrative judge or a hearings officer would be assigned. That all would be public, unless it was illustrative of non-disciplinary action, which is a specific provision. That would be non-public. But primarily, that process and procedure is non-public. C is investigate and prepare reports on any matter within the scope of this chapter. A lot of that might have to do with reports of investigation that the board also reviews in non-public. They get those from the medical review subcommittee. So as far as process and procedure, that's all illustrated in the statute and the board's rules as to how they have to go about, investigation process. Subject to change of 655, that might, shake things up a bit. But as it is now, that process and procedure is all illustrated within the statute. So they just wanted to identify that.
So if we were to pass this, we essentially would be assigning a person who would have to cipher through all what's public and non-public and then make it as transparent as possible with the things that are public. Am I understanding correctly?
That's my understanding.
All right, thank you. I just want to make sure I was understanding what you said. Further questions?
Thank you.
Being done? Thank you. Cheryl Jensen. Good morning, welcome. Turn on the mic there, please, if you would. Just hit the button until the red light comes on. There you go.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. I haven't testified before you until
welcome.
today, so. My name is Cheryl, well, good morning, Senators. My name is Cheryl Jensen. I live in Bethlehem, and I support this Bill 454, which the House passed, but I still wonder whether it will result in true oversight and transparency. Also, with my testimony, I have included that Boston Globe article, and I also, that talks about the board's failures, the medical board's failures, and I also have included another article from the Detroit Free Press, from, that's where the radiologist moved and is still practicing. That's not in my sorry, that's at the bottom of my testimony. I came here to tell you about my experience and others with the New Hampshire Medical Board and to comment on the bill. My husband put it succinctly when he said, "It seems that these boards have twisted the oath of first do no harm into first do no harm to other members of the medical profession." This legislation is too late to impact me. However, I want to keep what happened to me from happening to others. Unfortunately, I think there is nothing in this bill related to revoking a license for malpractice. A New Hampshire radiologist, Mark Guilfoyle, missed my breast cancer for 3 years, which really has ruined the rest of my life. By the time his superior discovered this, I had 1 tumor surrounded by 3 tumors. It's kind of like a planet surrounded by 3 moons. And it had also spread to 5 lymph nodes. And what did this medical board do? And at this point, it knew about all these issues, and it was reaching a settlement with Mark Guilfoyle. It fined him only $750 for misdiagnosing the breast cancers of 24 women in New Hampshire that we know of. And he's still licensed in 7 states to practice, one of the states being New Hampshire. That's unbelievable to many people. Regarding the bill, I have 4 points. I think it's a good idea to have non-medical people on the board because it's ludicrous to think that any profession can police itself. However, with 6 physicians and only 3 public members of the board, it's still weighted in favor of physicians. And in that same section, I agree with the wording that public members should have no connection with the medical profession. But in there, it says this applies to at least 2. And why not all 3 in the interest of fairness? And I have no answer to that question. I support an annual report by a public transparency advocate, but as somebody pointed out, what's going to be done with that information? You know, where is it going to be? What is it going to be? And to what extent is it going to be made public? I think it was mentioned here, although it was hard to hear back there, that a lot of this stuff is private. So how are people really to know? My husband and I were both reporters, and we still found it difficult, extremely difficult, to find this information online when we searched. It also seems that in this bill, there are too many exemptions to making it public, especially with the vague wording, quote, or in other statutes. I think the bill should definitely allow the Office of Professional Licensure to have more authority over the medical board. Because, as I recently learned, the medical board can overrule the Office of Public, the Office of Public Licensure. And I disagree with the comment that the medical board has worked well. And I know that's not in the testimony because I just heard it. And if it worked well, it would already be making this information public. So and as I said before, the medical board knew what had happened when it was reaching the settlement with Guilfoyle. And he received a slap on the wrist and I got a slap in the face. that's the way I feel about the medical board. And then the last thing you can kind of ignore because I finally figured out what that sentence means. But it says like only in the case of a vacancy in the office of the medical director that the commissioner gets to appoint 3 public members. In the context of that paragraph, it was confusing. So maybe you want to make it into 2 sentences. I don't know. And, you know, that's sort of my testimony. And I really hope that you have the opportunity to read those 2 articles. I know you're very busy, but they go into much more than I can convey here. And I hope that this bill doesn't get watered down because it already, I think, is not enough. So I hope that Representative Pearson continues to work on this and introduce more bills. I mean, I'm for it, even though I have, qualms. So thank you for this opportunity to testify. And if you have any questions, I, of course, will answer them.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jensen, and thank you for coming in and sharing your story. Any questions from the committee?
Okay. Yes, thank you.
All right, well, thank you for coming in.
And I would love to stay to hear more testimony, but we have to get back to Bethlehem.
Well, it just so happens you're the last one I have signed up, so I think
okay.
you've heard it all. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on House Bill 454? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing. I have mine here if you want it.
It won't do this for me. No, it's okay, I got it. I'm used to making these,
Oh, sorry. I forgot my part. All right, next we're going to open the hearing on House Bill 258. And Rep. Reed, would you like to introduce the bill? Nope, wrong one, sorry. Rep. Kelly. I filed one down. Do we have anybody here to introduce the bill? I don't think so. Senator Gendro, would you like to do the honors again? You've done so well filling in for us. All right.
Why don't we have Representative Rhodes introduce that?
Senator, I was going to say, is it a criminal justice bill? I don't know the bill by title, but if it's a criminal justice bill.
No, it's relative to animal chiropractors.
Oh, okay.
Rose out.
All right. Senator Gendro, we'll let you do the honors. Thank you.
See which one, because it does come with an amendment too, just introduce the original.
Just introduce the original bill, yeah.
It was amended by the House.
Yeah, I don't think I have one.
Introduced as amended by the House.
Yes.
So that's the one I should have? Yeah. Okay. So for the record, Senator Carrie Gendro, District 1, and I'm here to introduce House Bill 258 as amended by the House, and it's relative to animal chiropractors. This bill exempts individuals who have completed a nationally recognized animal chiropractic program as determined by the Executive Director of the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification from veterinary licensure requirements.
Would you like questions?
No question.
Thank
I
you.
don't have a dog in this fight.
Good adjustment. All right, that was good. All right, we have Elizabeth Eaton from OPLC.
Good morning. Thank you for hearing my testimony. My name is Elizabeth Eaton from the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification. I'm an attorney representing both the boards of veterinary medicine and chiropractic examiners. And we have had several meetings since the first introduction of this bill. Both boards are neutral. They take no position except with some concerns. And so the Board of Veterinary Medicine, both boards are concerned about accountability for these animal chiropractors. The Board of Veterinary Medicine proposed adding language regarding referrals. That amendment was rejected by the House. The Board of Licensed Chiropractors has met twice since the House amended the bill, and they proposed adding language saying that the animal chiropractor must be a licensed chiropractor under the jurisdiction of the Board of Chiropractic Examiners. And that's the proposed amendment that I handed with the highlighted language. That's the only change that that both boards would be comfortable with, so that someone is holding these animal chiropractors accountable for the care of these animals.
All right, thank you. Questions? Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you know, with an animal chiropractic program, whether or not they are registered with an organization, and then the state would then license them? Do you know anything about that program whatsoever?
I know just a little bit. I listened to the chiropractors on the board talk about it. One of them has experience with animal chiropractic care in Florida. They took it was a course, so it wasn't just one class. It was a whole certification course. They were certified, and so there wasn't any registration with an organization necessarily for an animal chiropractor, but they did get a certification from that course. And so an animal chiropractor could be a veterinarian, and many veterinarians practice chiropractic care on animals. This would just be someone outside of that practice, a non-veterinarian, taking a certification course and having that educational certification, but there's no other registration process that I know of.
May I follow up?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason I'm trying to get to it is it better to have them certified if there is a national certification that they can get versus having them be both certified and then have the state of New Hampshire licensing them, where we could just have New Hampshire require that they be certified by that program?
I think that the certification takes care of the educational concern. However, the concern and the reason why the Board of Chiropractors wants to see them licensed is so that there can be someone providing oversight to the animal chiropractor. So it's less about an educational component here. It's more about an accountability. If an animal suffers harm, who is holding these animal chiropractors accountable?
One more follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'm trying to get to is if someone is licensed in the state of New Hampshire and they hurt an animal or they hurt numerous animals, we can pull their license and they won't be licensed in the state of New Hampshire. But if they're certified by a national organization, there should be a way to notify that certifying body, so that way they're not going to move from New Hampshire, where they've lost their license, and go to Maine, and people in Maine will have no idea that there was an issue because they're still certified. And that's why I'm trying to get to, should we accept their certification, and if they violate any of the tenets of that certification, their organization will be notified, and it will be nationally, so they will know, hey, someone was certified here, they violated their oath or whatever it is, we're going to pull their certification and they can't practice anywhere.
Thank you for digging in. I didn't understand initially, but I understand what you're asking now. I'm not aware of a national certification that would report to all states. I simply don't know if that exists for animal chiropractors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I have two. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around the practice of animal chiropractic. So is it both that there are some chiropractors who practice on humans, and then they subsequently take this it sounds like a professional development course to gain a certification to also practice on animals? Is that correct?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I don't know that it's professional development type of course.
Okay.
I think that it's more of a college specialty. I understand that there are colleges and universities who offer this. There may be others who might be better able to answer that question. But yes, and chiropractors will get that specialty, that certification, education, and subsequently work on animals as well as humans.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for that clarification, because as I read the bill, I thought we were just, so in preparing for this, I read this and, looked at some of the work from the other committee, and I thought we were just talking about veterinarians who do chiropractic on animals. But with your amendment, what you're telling us is that it is also chiropractors who practice on people who can also practice on animals. So this license would be for both, or is it two separate?
Thank you. No, thank you for that question. I think I've been dealing with this bill for so long that I forget to explain the underlying reasoning, and I think we also didn't have the sponsor here to help explain that as well. The idea behind this bill is to allow anyone to practice chiropractic care on animals, and that it would exempt it from the practice of veterinary medicine so that they would not be accused of practicing veterinary medicine without a license. And that was the whole idea behind this bill, is to allow anyone to provide chiropractic care to animals. And it was amended based on various testimony. At one point, like I said, the Veterinary Medicine Board wanted to have a referral system from veterinarians to these animal chiropractors. So the bill proposes that anyone practice chiropractic care on animals. It didn't even ask for a certification process. So that subsequently came up that we asked the executive director of the OPLC to approve certification programs for these animal chiropractors, so that there is some kind of boundary around them. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. It answers that question, but then further convolutes this, because it is starting to make a little more sense now. Just so to clarify, this is somebody who is a chiropractor or a vet who then takes this special certification course to learn to do this practice on animals.
That is what the boards of veterinary medicine and chiropractic examiners want.
Okay.
However, the bill was initially proposing that anyone take a certification course. And without the language of licensed chiropractor, that's what it's saying. Anyone can take this course and work on animals, whether they're a chiropractor or veterinarian or
I
a
see what you're
banker
saying.
or doctor.
Okay.
So-
All right. That. Thank you.
I think that generates a question for me now. So with your amended language, you'd be changing it from an individual to a licensed chiropractor. Would that then exclude a veterinary from performing chiropractic care?
No, it would not. Under the scope of veterinary medicine, veterinarians can provide chiropractic care to animals.
I got it. So the problem is we're only seeing this little section of the bill, of the RSA here. And
Right.
that's why I was asking.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you for that question.
Further questions? Seeing none, we thank you. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you very much.
I have no one else signed up on this bill. Is there anybody else? Come on up, Simon. I had an idea there might be somebody else after the testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the ED&A Committee. I am Simon Thompson. I'm with the Sheehan Finney Capital Group, And I'm here on behalf of one of our clients, the New Hampshire State Chiropractic Society, member organization of many of the chiropractors here in New Hampshire. Just thought I could provide a little bit of background. I wasn't planning to testify, but there's been some great questions, and I thought, while Elizabeth did some good job providing some background, I could maybe help do a little bit as well. We did not introduce this bill. Representative Kelly did reach out to us at the very beginning of the session when she proposed this bill on behalf of one of her actual chiropractor who had been treating her dog. And one of our concerns is, so we are officially neutral on the bill. And one of the concerns that we did have, Elizabeth talked about, and we do support the proposed amendment, because as it is written, as the bill was amended and passed out of the House, it just basically said anybody, Senator Pearl, you could do this, you could just take this national certification and start, practicing on animals. So the addition of licensed chiropractor in the proposed amendment would be very much supported by our organization. The key here is when you go to chiropractic school, you learn how to treat humans. You don't learn how to treat animals. So to just say, well, I'm going to start doing chiropractic care on animals, that was a concern for our members without any type of certification. And so adding the national certification provided us with the comfort that, the chiropractors that wanted to go down this road of adjusting animals would have the necessary knowledge and skills to do that, because they did not get that at with their original schooling. So again, we're neutral on the bill. We definitely support this amendment to kind of provide a little bit more certainty on who will be able to do this. And I thought I would just kind of provide a little bit of that background, and happy to try to answer any questions if there are any still remaining.
All right, further questions? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging this question, and thank you, Mr. Thompson. Have you had an opportunity to look at this amendment drafted by OPLC?
Yes.
You have.
And
does your membership feel good about it?
yes, this amendment was drafted at kind of the end of the process during the House work sessions, and we tried to get this added, and kind of, I think they were at a point where the back and forth was done, and this is what they wanted to go with, and
Okay.
so the plan was to try to add this in on this side to kind of just provide that extra assurance that it's an actual licensed chiropractor who will be getting the certification.
Okay, so your members have felt, okay, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
All right.
Anybody else like to testify on House Bill 258? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing. All right, next we will open up the hearing on House Bill 421. I'm sorry. Yeah. And we will recognize Representative Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, honorable members of the committee. For the record, my name is Ellen Reed. I represent Rockingham 10, that's Newmarket and Newfields, and I would like to ask the chair's permission to bring up the House Vice Chair of Criminal Justice, who was instrumental in the subcommittee, to come up with me.
Absolutely.
Representative Rhodes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm under the understanding that the Senate has already passed a Senate version very similar to this. I did file this bill back in September, so I won't belabor the point about the need of the bill, except for just to briefly summarize the testimony that we heard in the House hearing. So there have been repeated instances, and for the record, I don't know of any instances where this has happened on the state level in our State Department of Corrections facilities, but several instances on the county level of inmates or people who are incarcerated experiencing infections and inadequate access to period products. The infections in particular, we heard numerous examples of infections being derived from panties that were apparently not properly sanitized. Also, incarcerated people not able to get adequate period products in a timely manner. Either they were forced to wait longer than they should have, or the products they got were not adequate to their needs. In particular, there's a number of conditions that can cause extremely heavy flows, endometriosis, PCOS, a number of conditions. And also, if you're provided kind of this one-size-fits-all product, you may run the risk of toxic shock syndrome as well as other issues. So we heard from several women who had personally experienced it, as well as other people who've documented these issues. Also, without proper, and this is kind of a broader issue of what we call period poverty, without access to proper period products, people experience shame, are unlikely to go out and socialize in the way that they would normally want to. And also, I think probably especially vulnerable would be people experiencing this in incarceration, where they might be prone to bullying if there were stains or something on their clothing. So as I said, I'm under the understanding that the state does very well in this regard, but there are a number of counties, and the counties were named in the hearing, but I won't go into names. I don't know of any county commissioner that has been opposed to this, so I don't think that it's been an issue, except for these kind of random instances that have happened. I think similar to the Senate, this came out unanimously out of the subcommittee. I was very grateful to Vice Chair Rhodes' work. She operated a fantastic subcommittee that not only included the members, but the advocacy organization stakeholders, the commissioner of the State Department, and myself. And for the record, it was a room full of women. And we went through extensive language debate and got to what we felt was perfect language. And it was passed unanimously out of the subcommittee, unanimously out of the committee, and unanimously on the floor as the part of the consent calendar. Just one opposition in the original hearing was on the concept of an unfunded mandate. I don't believe that this is an unfunded mandate, because it is the responsibility of the constitutional responsibility of any governmental entity that takes people into custody to care for that person's health and hygiene. So it would be unconstitutional to not provide basic health and hygiene to a person that's in the custody of the state or the county. So the bill before you, as amended by the House, is the official House position. It includes a choice of standardized products that include the choice of pads, tampons, and panty liners of varying strengths. So that's an additional thing that we currently don't have. It includes, unlike the Senate version, items impacted by menstruation. So these are things that may be stained. This says they have to be sanitized and without stained, unstained, to be returned to them. And it also, unlike the Senate version, I believe, addresses the need to address that need for immediate needs, right? So like you can't have someone wait on somebody to approve it and then it takes a few hours or whatever. And the other thing it says is that underwear will be provided in new condition. I do know that later on someone said, not any of the representatives, but somebody brought up, well, what does new condition mean? I think all of us understood new condition to mean new. So I do have an amendment before you that addresses that, as well as other issues that were brought up with the Senate version. So that is the House position. Like I said, I did prepare an amendment according to the issues that we heard under the Senate hearing. It's not the Senate hearing, but the House hearing on the Senate version. And so the amendment before you basically addresses all the things that the Senate version addressed, which is it specifically says 20 instead of adequate number. It gives it an exact number. I had initially hesitated to do that because I was worried about the unfunded mandate. What if someone doesn't need 20? Then you're forcing them to receive 20. But I understand that the advocacy organizations were quite adamant about needing to put a number in there. The House version is the one that's before you. Do you have it? as amended by the House, says that, so the second paragraph is what, the two paragraphs deal with the county and the state. The second paragraph deals with the state. And it says it's anyone in the custody of the state, there on the second line of that paragraph. The House understood that to be interpreted as anybody in the custody of that state, including juveniles. All of our juveniles are in the custody of the state, not counties. So that's what we thought was good. However, because this paragraph is specific to the Department of Corrections, we, in the amendment before you, we expanded that. So there are two paragraphs on the back, one under paragraph 169 and then the other under paragraph 621. So all of those places, so there's two departments that can detain juveniles. And so we're making sure it's present in every paragraph that addresses those departments, the separate departments. I will also say that this amendment before you corrects the issue that was in the Senate bill, where the paragraph in the Senate bill that was intended to talk about the state actually references the superintendent of each county, so which was incorrect. So that is fixed in this amendment. And then the last thing, the only thing I didn't include that was in the Senate version that I did not include in this House version is the idea of biological menstruation. So as you know, judges, when they don't have a legal definition given to them in RSA, they go to Merriam-Webster's third edition. The Merriam-Webster third edition definition of menstruation is a cyclical discharging of blood, secretions, and tissue debris from the uterus that recurs in non-pregnant breeding age primate females at approximately monthly intervals, and that is considered to represent a readjustment of the uterus to the non-pregnant state following proliferative changes accompanying the preceding ovulation. So the definition of menstruation is biological. There's no such thing as a non-biological menstruation. Having said that, this bill is now belongs to you. I've provided you an amendment language if you would like to do that, but you can certainly add the word biological if you so choose. With that, I'd like Vice Chair Rhodes to add anything she would like to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing I'd really like to add is that during our subcommittee, initially, we were actually asked to please not include a specific number. And, you know, basically, we were told that it's unfortunate that some inmates may use these products for drug use and or getting drugs in or out. And when the Senate version came to us, it had a specific number in there. And at that time, Commissioner Hanks did approach me and explained why she later realized that maybe that was a better idea to actually have the number in there. So in the amendment you see before you, you know, we took what we were asked to do after the fact, and we clearly addressed every single one of those issues. Somewhere along the way, it's unfortunate. I don't know how or why this became to be, you know, so entangled. But this is a piece of legislation I have to tell you, I never would have thought of this. And we really, really did do some fantastic work. And the version you have in front of you, like my colleague mentioned, 20-0 out of the Criminal Justice Committee, which is not easy. Certainly passed the floor of the consent calendar. After the fact, we were asked to, hey, can you maybe add the part in about the juvenile detention centers? Originally, we were asked not to do that. And I think those are the things that are important to understand. So we did address the after the facts. That's the amendment that you see in front of you. And I would just encourage anybody to, you know, simply to add that to what you have. It is just fantastic and nothing is forgotten.
Thank you both.
And with that, I'm happy to take questions. I think everybody, both chambers, are in agreement that this is something that needs to get passed in some way, some form. And before you, there's the official House position and also the amendment that addresses the Senate, previous Senate position.
Questions? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Thank you for your comprehensive work on this. my question is, I know that you had received some conflicting information on the front end of drafting the bill, and then, received some subsequent clarifying information after it got through the House. I am assuming there's a specific reason to have left out the number 20 in the juveniles, like that, that adults in custody through the state and county are provided no less than 20, and minors in juvenile detention or in the care and custody of the state are as needed. Was that so I'm sure there was an in-depth conversation about that, so I'm just looking
The in-depth
to hear what your work.
Thank you, Senator. The in-depth conversation was in regards to the issue between providing an exact number like 20. Currently, the practice of the state is 15. And I'm under the understanding from conversations I've heard third person that was intended, they wanted to increase that number to 20 just to kind of cover their bases. The conversation is between should we include an exact number or just simply say as necessary. And that conversation hinged on whether or not this would be an unfunded mandate. So the idea is that if you're just saying that you need to care for their basic health and hygiene, that is not an unfunded mandate because that's what they have to do constitutionally. Once you specifically to the juvenile. Right. So that was the core of the conversation as to why the juvenile specifically doesn't contain the number 20. I can't speak to you, but obviously this is not the Senate amendment itself. This is proposed language for a Senate amendment. I presume that you all would, change it as you see fit, whether adding the word biological or what have you.
Thank you. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. There we go, Mr. Chairman.
Promotion.
You got promoted today.
I'm not sure I want that.
Thank you, representatives, for presenting us. And I'm looking at the amendment, and there seems to be some contradiction here because I'm looking at this proposed amendment. It's 1317H, I believe, dated April 4th, I think. It says, on the first page, line 28, upon intake, new undergarments shall be provided. That means when someone is going in process into a correctional facility, they are to get new underwear. That, yes. To me, new means out of the package, not worn by anybody. This is what you get. This is what you're going to get for the duration of your stay here. But then it goes on to say on line 29, any items provided by the state to incarcerated persons that are impacted by menstruation shall be provided in an adequate number, unstained and sanitized before being provided to another incarcerated person. Well, if everyone's getting new underwear, we don't need this because everyone gets new underwear. So this idea of getting used underwear, stained underwear, even used underwear goes out the window because that was one of the things that we had heard during testimony, that it was degrading and it was dehumanizing to get someone else's underwear. So would you be opposed to just taking all of that out because everyone's getting new underwear?
Thank you for your question, Senator. And the exact answer to that is we were told that, unfortunately, this language would, when a person is at intake, and I will say we actually rearranged the sentences so it started with intake and then throughout the stay. We were told that you are not always guaranteed to get back your original undergarments. So when you come in as a new intake, you are going to get brand new ones. You do put your name on them. However, when things go to the launder and come back, they do their best to give you your own. However, that is not a guarantee. So that's why you said, okay, well, we don't want somebody getting somebody else's stained undergarments. And can we at least make sure that they are as stain-free as possible? And then we even had the discussion of there's a point where they will just have to be thrown away. So unfortunately, I do think it has to stay in there because the testimony that we heard
was that they cannot guarantee that you are going to get your own back. At least gave you brand new ones when you first came in.
I need to follow her up, and then maybe your follow-up question may or may not be necessary. So yes, it needs to stay in there. It is true that we heard that whilst the state, again, is very good, and I think all of the counties strive for the practice of having the exact laundry returned. Sometimes it may not happen on the county level, but that's actually, in my understanding, not the reason that's there. The reasons that's there, and this is what I addressed in my testimony just now, is because underwear is not the only thing that gets impacted by menstruation. Sheets, uniforms, these things. So whilst we say your underwear has to be provided new when you come in, and then it will be laundered and sanitized and returned to you, the sheets don't have to be provided new, but they do have to be unstained and sanitized every time. You cannot get stained uniforms, stained sheets. You will not be provided stained or unsanitized uniforms or sheets. That is why that needs to stay in there. And I need to add that we heard in testimony that incarcerated people are not even allowed to wash the blood out of their own clothing or sheets in their sink, that is something that they can get in trouble for. So again, it's very important that this is left in.
Okay, follow up. Thank you. Quite frankly, I think that needs to be in a separate section and addressed separately in dealing with this rather than lumped in, because it is confusing, because the way that it makes it sound is that, okay, you're going to get new underwear when you come in, but it says any items provided by the state. And I understand now why you have put that there, but that can include underwear, unstained and sanitized. Look, we all know, male and female, we all know underwear comes in a variety of sizes. I mean, what happens if you're not getting your underwear back, the underwear's too big or it's too small? I mean, we've opened a door here, and because we've opened this door, you've got to think about every single element of that. We are going to provide you with underwear. Okay. What is that going to look like? You're going to try to give someone a pair of underwear that's actually going to fit. You're not going to take someone who wears a size 22 and gives them a size 4 underwear. I mean, I think that all of that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be fleshed out in order to work appropriately. I just think that by lumping, because underwear is a separate issue, it's an intimate garment, there should be a separate section for anything else. And I understand uniforms, I understand bed sheets being stained. That should be in a completely different section. And it could be, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just somatic, but it needs to be a stronger statement instead of just being lumped in with everything else.
So to answer the question I think I heard in there, is the fact that this is dealing with essentially what we might colloquially call like period justice. This is dealing with how inmates are treated in terms of their menstrual needs. So this language was not confusing to any of the women on the subcommittee that discussed it in depth and came up with this exact language. However, I might propose to you that any other items, the insertion of the word other, any other items, the previous sentence says, upon intake, new undergarments shall be provided. The next sentence, any other items provided by the county that are impacted by menstruation shall be provided in an adequate number, unstained and sanitized.
Senator, if I just may add, when we had our subcommittee, one of the things that we were told was, and I agree with you if you feel that needs to be in a separate paragraph. I understand your reasoning, and I certainly don't have any issues with that. What I would like to add is, like I was mentioning during the subcommittee, we were told that, yes, they can guarantee new undergarments upon intake. However, they did think that getting to the point where, everything being brand new from get-go was going to be something that would actually not be possible because of funding. So that is why we worded it the way that we did. But we certainly are up for a suggestion.
Further question?
No, I think more that as probably a statement. We have the responsibility to make sure that when we're creating new statutes, to look at every language, and basically we're wordsmiths, we're trying to get it right. Whether you're a male or a female doesn't matter. It's about the language and getting the language appropriate. And that's the point that I'm coming from, is that looking at it and crafting something that's actually going to work in statute rather than based upon how I identify myself. So, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marissa Chase. Is Marissa here? Oh, there she is. She's in the back. Come on up, Marissa. You are next. Oh, is that me? I'm sorry.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Marissa Chase. I represent the New Hampshire Association for Justice. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done on, that you're undertaking on House Bill 421 and that you did on Senate Bill 272. This is a really important issue that we are in strong support of. One thing I wanted to point out, it was at our request, and I apologize that I was not able to attend the House Criminal Justice Subcommittee meeting on House Bill 421, but something we mentioned for Senate Bill 272 in the hearing in this committee was the definition of youth development centers and youth detention centers. I was just able to take a brief look at Amendment 1317H, and my concern is that this does not cover all youth detention facilities, both private and public placement facilities, which is something that by simply in the, I think could be easily remedied by just referencing RSA, I brought the wrong packet with me, 169B14C or E, and then you don't have to define RSA 169B-14, paragraphs C or E. I think by just calling out those statutes in the inclusion of menstrual hygiene products, undergarments, etc., that will kind of cover them. And then you don't have to kind of outline everything else, because everything else will be outlined for the general, the counties and incarcerated people in counties and state facilities.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because we're now doing something new, we're going to require any female being held or incarcerated, whether it's at the state prison, whether in the county, or in a youth facility, that we're going to be furnishing them with undergarments. We talk about undergarments. Usually the conversation has been centered around underwear, that we do not want women to receive underwear that have been worn by other people and are stained. And we had that testimony here in our committee. Do you believe that when we talk about upon intake, new undergarments shall be provided, that number one, when we talk about undergarments, we're not only talking about panties, we're also talking about bras, if it's appropriate. So do you think we should separate out bras from panties?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would point to an alternative amendment that I believe the Women's Foundation had drafted that called out clothing or bed items. And I don't feel comfortable answering that. I would defer, I guess, to Commissioner Hanks on that question on how they, what their process is for issuing all types of clothing and bed items.
May I follow up, Mr. Chair? Thank you. On that same issue about new undergarments, do you think it would be appropriate to include undergarments of an appropriate size to make sure that someone is getting something that will actually fit them, rather something that's too big or too small?
I think that intent would be great. I think that makes sense. Again, I would defer definitions to Commissioner Hanks and how they kind of issue clothing as is in their existing processes. I apologize. I'm not familiar enough with the inner workings.
Okay, just curious.
Further questions?
I think that intent is totally appropriate, and I would support that.
All right.
Thank
I
you.
don't see any more questions. Thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. Devin Quinn.
No, I don't see anyone. Thank you.
Passing around, just, this is a breakdown of where the Senate bill was that you had seen previously in this House bill. This is the same breakdown that I provided to the House committee when they were looking at the Senate. So just a quick overview broadly of the two differences, the two bills, and then there's a couple of tiny little language things that would kind of get us up to speed to make sure those things add up. So the major differences that you've already noticed is that the House bill, the original bill, included underwear, where the Senate bill you saw did not. And that's something that you may want to consider keeping in this bill. Yes. One more?
Nope.
Oh, sorry about that.
Thank you, Tucker. I didn't catch it either.
The Senate bill that you had seen that wasn't in the original House bill, but is now being added in the some amendments that we're hearing about, is the youth detention facility inclusion that was in the Senate bill. Would want to make sure that that got into this final bill, and exactly how that's written in might be a little bit different. And then the third thing is, of course, defining adequacy with a number, a specific number. Those are the three major differences, but I think everyone so far has really been in agreement on those three major things. So if I could just point out a couple of language pieces that kind of get to those points. Some minor things, well, things that add up. I know that Commissioner Hanks wanted to write biologically menstruate. Maybe that's something that she may or may not have an opinion on, so I just wanted to bring that up because I don't know if she would. Representative Reeds and Rhodes have in here, but in no case less than 20. I think that's very similar to what the Senate had said. A combination of 20 standard issue, adequacy shall be considered at a minimum 20 standard issue. So we're getting to that point. There was a comment by Representative Roy in the House session that he wanted to make sure that it said, there was a sentence in the Senate version that said an individual may request additional. So we really wanted to make sure that there was a minimum of 20, but also that it would also be free to get any more. And so he wanted it to say shall receive, not shall request, to make sure that it went in that way. So that's just language that we could add to that. There's the addition of new undergarments. I also was a little bit confused by any items. I didn't know if that meant any menstrual hygiene products or any underwear. And so to me, it would just be clarifying if it was any clothing or bed items. Maybe that's a way to talk about it. And then also we want to make sure that we get the roles at the different facilities correct. So at the state, we'd want to say, I know the Jane Graham from DOC wanted to say the warden or director when we talk about the state. And then lastly, I just want to make sure that we do discuss a minimum number to define adequacy when we're talking about youth detention facilities as well, because I want to make sure that we're being standard across county, state, and juveniles.
Thank you. Questions? I think you did a pretty good job explaining it. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Jason Henry from Rockingham County. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Guess I'm on the hot seat. Jason Henry, Superintendent of Rockingham County Jail. Where to start? So the bill has gone back and forth a couple times with my other superintendents. The bill that came out from the House, we are fully supportive. I guess I can go over some of the stuff that's here. Sometimes when we do bills, we need to separate state versus county because they're two different things. So sometimes these bills do not make sense on one area to another. If you look at just my county alone, I have 3,000 plus intakes a year, even more. Compared to the state, was not going to have nearly that kind of intake. So if you're talking about brand new undergarments, male or female, that's a lot of brand new packages. All right, and that would be, to me, that would be unfunded mandate. All right, state prison, we're there for a long time. You're not talking a lot. So you got two different things going on here. And all of our policies do say clean, sanitary, all those kinds of things. So RSA 30B already covers in there that we have to provide medical, anything medical. If somebody wasn't providing that, that's shame on that county, because that's clearly in RSA 30B under superintendent, and it's the superintendent's responsibility to make sure that is done. So 100% support feminine hygiene products, and I have for over 20 years. Matter of fact, my degree's in phys ed, a minor in health. I was a teacher. I taught health. Okay, it is not an unfunded mandate. Okay, neither is toilet paper, neither is toothpaste, all those things. Anything that they need is not an unfunded mandate. That is biological needs. So we're all for it. You know, I guess you can also put in there, you know, we have to get toilet paper out if you want to, next thing. But just so you know, the law is clearly put in there, we have to provide this stuff. So sometimes I think we're going a little too far. And if you're getting too many regulations, have to have 20, have to have this or not, state might be okay. Jails get a lot of protective custodies. They're in there for one night. That's gone next morning. Do I give them 20 products right away? Or they're only for 2 days sometimes because they go to court. They get bailed out the next day. We're very short term. In, out, in, out, in, out. Okay, so that's a lot of, again, products. And I can tell you now, if I give out 20, I'm throwing away the rest when they leave. I'm not going to give them to another person, one. Two, they are tampered with. Okay, when people come into a facility, when we have to change people out, we have to have them take off those products because they put stuff in those products. Men or women, it doesn't make a difference. Okay, so they can be abused, and they are abused. But at the same time, we should not be stigmatizing them. Whatever they need for their feminine hygiene products, it's all in hand in our processing areas, and it's given to them freely at no cost, and as many as they need. And again, I will say, shame on some county or some superintendent that wasn't following RSA 30B. It says in there clearly we have to provide medical care. With that, I'll end your questions.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Carson.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Superintendent. So you have someone that comes in and they're just being held. It's pretrial confinement. They might be awaiting on bail, sentencing for all of that stuff. Under this, you would be required to give them new underwear, new products, everything, even though they might be there for 2 days.
According to that bill, yes. So all of our 1,600 plus, or say I'll break in half for females, maybe it's 1,000 female intakes. Or if you're doing both, which I'm going to advocate if you're going to do for one, you do for both. That would be 3,000 people coming through the door, 3,000 pairs of several underwears, because we're not going to give them one, and panties and bras and everything else every single time. And then we go wash them and put them in giant piles for what? All my career of 20 plus years, we've taken all laundry, and I've done laundry, I've been on the floor, everything else. We take it down, we wash it, sanitize it. If it's got holes, rips, dirty, you throw it away. Okay, and then you give out new stuff. We throw the stuff away. Sheets are washed. They're not brand new sheets given out. Blankets are washed. Everything is washed. Carroll County Yards that before, we had ozone machine that washes everything. So everything's taken out of it. So if you want new every single time, it's going to be a lot of money to do that. So yes, you'd have to give that every single time. The way that bill is, every single time come in something new.
Thank you. Do you think it would be appropriate to add upon sentencing? Because we do know individuals are sentenced at the county level for up to a year. So you could have a female who menstruates incarcerated for a year. Do you think it would be appropriate to add upon sentencing, because now you know that female is going to be there at your facility for at least a year?
I'll say no, because laundry, most places, is put into a laundry cart, taken down, washed, cleaned, folded by inmates, and then distributed back out again. Goes onto the units. You get this, there's multiple sizes. You get the size you need, and everything else. It's not. A lot of places don't have individual wash machines. They're giant industrial wash machines everything's put into. If you want to give them a new pair, I guess on that day, but when it goes to wash, it's probably not going to come back as their same pair. Unless, again, you want to mandate that law that everybody's got to get some sort of separate laundry bag and do some sort of separate, as I said, keep going down the road here where we're going with this.
Mm-hmm. May I follow up one more? Thank you. This does say new undergarments shall be provided. Would you, as the superintendent, interpret that to read that bras should also be included in that?
Yes.
Because they are undergarments. So
Yes.
that would be a new garment that would have to be furnished to every female.
As I understand it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Perkins Cook.
Yeah, I think, I mean, my question may have been addressed. I think it's probably something we should all like discuss offline to get it right. But it was similar to Senator Carson's, like, if we put in some kind of alternate timing in terms of providing the products, you know, it sounds like that would address part of your concern, at least in terms of like issuing 20 new products to someone that's there for one night. Rather, if we had language that was more like, if someone in custody is experiencing menstruation, then they shall be provided with these products. I get your greater point, which is that most superintendents are probably doing this as well, but it doesn't sound like that really addresses this sort of concept of new undergarments. So I may not have a question and all that. I'm just trying to think through with you, how we get this right. So thank you, Chair.
Certainly. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
So I have Don McKinney from New Hampshire Legal Assistance signed in favor. Did you want to speak? Okay, I didn't have it on. Anybody else that would like to speak on this? Seeing none, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 421.
I do have a proposed amendment. I think that, oh. Oh, this one, you received.
All right, we're going to open up the hearing on House Bill 238. And is Rep. McMahon here? Or...
He is here.
All right, Rep. McMahon is here. There we go. I found you on the sheet. Sorry. Thank you.
Now you're your honor. First it was Mr. President, now it's your honor.
I'm your honor. All right.
All kinds of accolades today. Next will be your majesty.
Oh, my goodness. I don't know if I want to stay around for that one. The floor is yours before this keeps going in a worse direction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The name is Representative Charlie McMahon. I'm a current member of the Children and Family Law Committee and also a longtime member in the past of Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs, and specific to dealing with our fellow citizens and those who have handicapped members of their family and the services that they need to maintain a standard that we have set in New Hampshire of home and community-based care. That being said, we had established some years ago the Quality Council to assist in policies that are handled by the Department of Developmental Services and HHS, et cetera, so that what is provided is meeting the challenges that our parents are facing. And that's what this bill is focusing on, because there was a restructuring taking place, and which you may already know about, with Alvarez and Marcel, that were a consulting company hired to assess the efficiency and effectiveness of various health and human service programs, and also those of the Bureau of Developmental Services. And during that time frame, and there's others who will speak to this today, the open communication with the Quality Council was not present. And that is the main reason for this bill before you today, is that they will play a material role in developing policies, the services, contracts, when I say contracts, what needs to be in a contract, in working with the department. It's not to take over what the department does, because they work, as we all know, very hard on this, but it's knowing what the needs are at the ground level, and we have the tool in place, which is the Quality Council, and to have that part of this process going forward. There's one issue that did come up during the House session, and well, prior to, I should say, but it was ensuring that there would not be a conflict of interest by putting a council member as part of the selection process of the contractor. That comes under other rules that are handled by the department. So that was taken out, and that's what's not in your amendment. So I want to make sure you know that there was a concern from the department on that, and it was requiring that a council member be appointed as part of the selection process. That is something that comes through the Department of Health and Human Services. But it's being part of what is required within that selection process and what the services are that are needed from those who are delivering those services. That's our area agencies, the parents themselves, our various intelligentsia that are part of the membership, that they be heard with a cooperative collaboration to achieve consensus with the department. And that's why this bill is before you today, and I'm asking for your support in this regard.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Rep. Pearson, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. I was looking for what.
You found a new one, huh?
We miss you next door.
Thank you.
Representative Mark Pearson, former chairman of Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs, now chairman of Children and Family Law, and previously and presently chairman of the DHHS Oversight Committee. When I was first elected to the House in 2016, I decided to make the developmental disability community a special focus, in part because one of my good friends growing up was such a person. And several of the patients in the medical center of which I'm part-time CEO are DD folks. So I do some work with the area, two of the area agencies, glad to do that. Members of the public, loved ones of DD people, and a few people from area agencies started bringing me some concerns, particularly about the change in waivers for the DD community. And so last year, I shuttled back and forth, trying to get together in one room, DD loved ones, area agency people, and folks at the Bureau, at the Department of Health and Human Services that deal with this specifically. Everybody was nice, everybody was kind. I really didn't think there was a lot of communication. I know as a CEO, I can sit in my office, work hard, care greatly, but not so much get out and seek the direct input and listen to it from members of my staff and from some of our patients. I have to remind myself to get out of my silo, even though I do good work in my silo. And so I believe the folks working with the DD community at the Department of Health and Human Services are professional and caring. In fact, a few of them even have DD loved ones. But I think this bill will help remind them to do their jobs better by building into the system as a requirement, they're seeking out and receiving input from the council that this bill establishes. We all should think to do it. I am glad that I now have people reminding me to do it, and I would like the folks at the Bureau and DHHS now to be required to do what they probably want to do, but now have to do.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I caught the silos in there too. All right, Chris. Yeah, you'll have to help me with the last name. I'm sorry.
No problem. Good morning, Chris Santinello, Associate Commissioner, Department of Health and Human Services.
And Nathan White, Chief Financial Officer with the Department of Health and Human Services.
And then we're going to bring Meredith up towards the end. We're going to be really efficient.
All right.
And be best use of your time. So at the department, we have serious concerns with this bill as presented. House Bill 238 and 3 similar House bills dealing with the developmental services were filed this session, and largely in a reaction to the Alvarez and Marcel report. I just want to provide some clarity regarding our engagement with Alvarez and Marcel. We contracted with them in the fall of 2020 in a response to anticipated significant fiscal concerns for the 2021 to 2023 budget due to the pandemic. We contracted with them to conduct an independent review, evaluation, analysis, and then issue a report with findings and recommendations for all areas of the department, which led to the subsequent recommendations to improve developmental services along with other areas of the department. In the House, several advocacy groups, stakeholders, and individuals and families raised concern over not being consulted by A&M on its report. We fully understand the core issue of transparency and communication, and for the past year and a half have conducted ongoing community outreach regarding the work. And it is also important to note that the work we are doing today is focused on compliance with a corrective action plan that we are under through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Since the fall of 2021, we have had approximately 205 different stakeholder sessions. Once we are transitioned and in compliance with our corrective action plan, we will focus on critical changes to update the service delivery system in the area of rates, information technology, intensive treatment services, and adding additional services to our waiver. I just want to point out that House Bill 608, which established a pilot program to support the Bureau of Developmental Services, was retained by the House Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs Committee with the clear understanding that monthly updates on the implementation of any changes within the Bureau of Developmental Services would be provided by the department to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on Health and Human Services, established in RSA 126. Additionally, this House bill could serve as a vehicle for any needed legislation. There are parts of this bill that we have amendment that we have no issues with, and I just want to point that out. We have no issue on page 2, lines 1 to 2, with the correction for the Disability Rights Center. We have no issue on page 2 with lines 27 to 29 about the information to be reviewed by the Quality Council. We also have no issue on page 3, lines 21 to 22, expanding that the chair or vice chair may convene meetings in addition to the commissioner, but we do want to make sure that the word designee stays in there. And we also have no issue on page 3, lines 26 to 35 regarding electronic participation.
Thank you, Chris. Again, Nathan White, Chief Financial Officer with the Department of Health and Human Services. Just for context, I was formerly the Bureau Director of the Contracts and Procurement, so I'm approaching this from that financial contracting procurement lens. My largest concern begins on page 3, Roman 8, line 36. That goes on to page 4. In this section, this would effectively require input from the council during the request for proposal development stage and also during the contracting stage. And as written, as amended by the House, it would also require that an individual sit on any bidding committee or review committee. RSA 21G37 is a state procurement law, and what that currently does is it makes sure that public funds are used in a transparent and objective manner. Anytime we make an award, that award is based off of objective criteria known to all parties in the state. Currently, the way that this is written, there's a clause in there that says the department shall give due deference to the council, and we have to solicit input during the development of an RFP. And so what that means is essentially we may have external parties that some of which may be on the boards of organizations that receive contracts and dollars from the state have the ability to influence the RFP at the development stage, which again, I'm approaching this from the financial perspective. We do have federal dollars, we do have state dollars in some of those contracts. And then B, there would be the ability to influence the terms given the due deference clause. And that could influence the payment terms, that could influence the actual contracting terms, some of which may run contrary to certain requirements. So again, I'm approaching this from the public stewardship of funds perspective, and there is no other standard like this in the state that I'm aware of. And this is a major fundamental change to state procurement as the state performs it today. As Senator Carson knows, there is the Advisory Committee on State Procurement. I don't believe this has gone before that committee, and whether this would be something that would need to be considered in a little bit more depth and detail.
Oh, wait.
Oh, no.
No, go ahead. No, go
Do you have
ahead.
a question before he goes?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Senator Carson.
Thank you. I just want everyone to know you are exactly correct. A few years ago, we did a lot of work on changing how the state enters into procurement, and there were two departments that we did not deal with. One was HHS and the other was transportation, just because the size and the scope of work that they do. And we've done a lot of work with the Department of Administrative Services to get everybody together on the same page, all other departments, and they are. And a great example of how that worked was during the COVID epidemic, when we went out to procure PPP for our state. Worked beautifully, and that was a message that was given to us on the advisory council. What I'm concerned about here, and I agree with you 100%, sir. This is very, very, very problematic, and I hope our committee seriously considers this. This would be something new. I don't know, and I don't believe it should be a part of the scope of this council when the council was originally created. So I just want to thank you for bringing all this forward. I appreciate your comments, and I do agree if somebody wants to consider this, then we're going to have to take a look at HHS and how they contract with everyone, because you can't single one group out to do it one way and everybody else has to do it a different way. Thank you.
Further questions before we let him?
So, do you have a question? No, I was just going to say Nathan and I have to run upstairs, speaking of contracts, to Governor and Council.
Okay.
We have Melissa Nemeth and Meredith Tellus here, and if you need us, they can text us to come back down.
Any questions before they go? All right, thank you.
Good morning, Meredith Tellus, Director of the Division of Program Quality and Integrity for the Department of Health and Human Services. I just wanted to raise a couple of other items, one of which echoes what Nathan White was referring to, just another concern with the concept of anyone outside the department sitting on a procurement is RSA 99D indemnifies state employees when they're acting, I can't remember the exact language, but it's like in good faith in the course of their work. I don't know how or if that would extend to a non-state employee who is then acting in a procurement where there were resulting damages. So I just wanted to raise that as another concern there. A couple other items I just wanted to raise with the committee. The first is on page 3, Roman numeral 5. The department will respond to the council's recommendations for improving service quality, quality assurance and continuous improvement systems in writing within 30 days. My concern is that I don't have a single individual dedicated to quality metrics for the Bureau of Developmental Services waivers. There are individuals in my shop and then also in the Bureau that are constantly working on the quality metrics, but it's all as part of the course of their other daily work. So I do not think we would be able to be responsive to this within 30 days without additional resources. So my concern there is really with the timing. That would just be, I don't think we could do it. If we did it, we would want to be really thoughtful and intentional in our response to the recommendations, and I would need absolutely more than 30 days to accomplish that. My larger concern starts in Roman 8 on page 3, line 36, and it goes really through line 1 and 2 of the following page, where it says that when the department's evaluating or determining the need or desirability for any changes relating to or which could impact any of the practices, policies, standards. When we say practices, policies, standards, I am interpreting that really broadly to apply to all of the department's management of the BDS program, whether or not there's any intersection to quality. So we've worked in my division really hard to help to define and strengthen policies and procedures across the department. It doesn't clarify here whether this is intended to cover written practices, policy standards, non-written practices, policy standards, but those practices, policies, and standards that we've developed and continue to develop are basic internal controls that we use to meet the expectations of our auditors, that we use to just capture internal institutional knowledge before people leave, that we use to train people on, and that we also use kind of from an HR perspective to hold people accountable. I can't really imagine how we would insert a third party into the creation of all of our policies and procedures. And my concern is really that at the end of the day, when an auditor comes and says, your policies and procedures here are not strong enough, they don't do what they need to do, we have to be responsive to that, not any other party. So I think for that area, I would just really look for further definition and clarification of what's being required there.
Questions? Senator Carson.
Thank you for your testimony, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I also echo your concerns. I'm looking on page 2 on line 30. I can understand why the council would want to review, interpret, and disseminate data and information on a regular basis to bring transparency. Interpreting, I think that one's a little iffy about interpreting what that is. They can have their own opinion, but maybe that word there needs to be changed. But to really, it says for proposed consulting or service contracts involving the provision of developmental services, the department shall confer and receive input from the council on provisions. I see that going way beyond what they're supposed to do, and what really bothers me is to require the selected contractor to solicit input from the council. That to me goes way, way, way beyond. And during the RFP process, that is not public. You're developing that RFP, and so they're going to be able to, under 4, review all that information and disseminate that data even before anything happens. I just don't see how that is going to work, and I agree with the 30 days. The RFP process can be a little convoluted. It can be much, much longer than that. So and then I mean, to require that the department give a statement indicating whether it agrees or disagrees with each of the council recommendations, this sounds like it is being proposed that this council is now going to oversee the RFP process. And they're the ones that are going to have control, and the state is going to have to do what they tell them to do. Do you think that that's appropriate?
I think the department shares your concerns. There's some language in on page 4 that was particularly concerning. I'm not sure if I'm going to find it, but it was basically that we will give due deference to the council's input. Does that mean that we are responsive to every recommendation or every piece of input from the council? Did you have something to add? Sorry, Chris.
No, I agree that we have serious concerns with that. And I also want to point out that, we totally understand and respect the role of the Quality Council. We know there are hiccups in communication. We have rectified that. We are working really hard for transparency, but there's also lots of other groups that have a stake in the work of the department and the Bureau of Developmental Services. So in a sense, this group is getting more of an influence than the other groups, such as like the Governor's Commission on Disability, the developmental, you know what I mean? So that is a concern as well.
Can I follow up? Thank you. It appears that this council was created to be an advisory group to the Department of Health and Human Services, not to be an oversight commission with the power to override state decisions. And I would agree that that is very, very problematic. If the council would like to bring legislation that is going to expand their ability to do things, I think that's a totally different discussion. But this is very, very troubling, and I think it goes far beyond the scope of the original intent. These are individuals that have been appointed to this council as opposed to the people that are vetted and hired by the state to do a job. They're held accountable for what they do. How do you hold the council accountable for what they do if they make a mistake or if someone oversteps their boundaries? It's very unclear and extremely vague. So we're looking at the disability community at large. There's always discussion within the community about what's best and whose voice is going to be heard the loudest. And I think it gives this council really a lot more of a say-so over anything than anybody else. Thank you.
Senator Altshuler.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for entertaining my question. It's abundantly clear from this legislation that there's a disconnect. And I appreciate the testimony you gave earlier, and you spoke very quickly and efficiently, and I couldn't write it all down. So I'm wondering, you had mentioned that you had 205 different stakeholder sessions in the past. Was it 2 years?
Since the fall of 2021.
Since the fall of 2021? 21.
So a year and a half.
All right, I got that wrong. Okay, fall of... and when you say stakeholder sessions, is it with this council and other organizations of like mind? Like, what is the...
So some of it is with Quality Council, some of it is with members, some of it is with families, some of it is with provider agencies, some of it is with area agencies. I can actually provide you with a breakout if that would be helpful. Not today.
No.
I can email it to you if that would help you.
Okay, follow up.
Oh, sure.
So I guess the group of people who came together to put this together is clearly feeling unheard.
Correct.
Right. So where do the people for whom this has come from fit into the stakeholder
Some of
meetings?
those are part of those stakeholder meetings. And I think Like I said earlier, there was major upset with the Alvarez and Marcel's report. I'm just putting it out there.
Okay.
And I think what's important to note is they were not brought in just for developmental services. There was very specific reasons. However, in their review and some of their recommendations, they pulled past work that the department engaged in with stakeholders for some of their recommendations. We have not started any of those recommendations aside from some initial information technology and some initial work with the intensive treatment services. And so we have committed to monthly reports with the Oversight Committee. We have actually, recognizing that I believe it was Representative McMahon, stated that the department probably didn't have the best communication at times with the Quality Council. We have changed who represents the department in those meetings, and so we understand and we're committed to communication.
Further question?
Not at this time, thank you.
Further questions from the committee? All right, thank you. Philip, could you maybe go open that window for the folks in the audience down there on the end too? They look a little warm back there. Yeah. Can you open that end window? Okay, William Walker. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, thank you. My name is William Walker. I live in Hollis. I live in Hollis with my son and wife. My son has autism. He's 24 years old, and he receives services through the developmental disability system that's impacted by this bill. I'm also the legislative liaison for Gateways Community Services, which is the area agency out of the Nashua area, but today I'm speaking as a family member. My wife, son, and I depend upon a functional developmental disability service delivery system. Okay, we expect that thing to work. And in order for the thing to work well, there needs to be clear rules for how change is brought about. Okay, and without those clear rules, things fall apart quickly. And I think we saw that last year. As you heard from others, this bill is likely a reaction to the BDS systems change proposal that came up in the past year. And I won't go into detail because everybody's covered what the change is. But the fundamental problem I see was that the overall proposal from the contractor was to change DHHS overall, all departments or all bureaus. And they forgot one thing in this, which was RSA 170A. And RSA 170A calls for the participation of people with disabilities and their families in changes. Okay, that was forgotten. And I think what happened as a result of that is automatically the walls came up. Parents were very upset about this because they didn't feel like they were participating in this. They felt like they were being presented to. They were not part of that change. It built up a wall, it built up frustration, and not just frustration from parents, but also from BDS themselves. It was a strain on everybody. The BDS staff, when I talked with them, I can tell they're exhausted by this, right? It was a very hard thing for them. And same thing for families, all right? We're very, very concerned about this. And my feeling is this: by tightening up the definition of these rules of what the Quality Council does, it helps prevent a situation like the one we were in. Okay. I also believe that if we had this rule in place, what would have happened in this BDS systems change, it would have been smoother, it would have engaged families, we would not have developed this rift between BDS and families, we would have maintained a collaborative environment between the people providing the services or the service delivery system itself and the families receiving those services. So I'm asking you to please support this bill just to help keep a functional developmental delivery system in place to help families like mine and keep the focus on where it needs to be, right? Which is all of us working together to provide a quality system for people like my family and my son.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. And prior to the rifts that it sounds like got bigger and bigger, what was your participation and other, what was participation like prior?
So my understanding prior to this, I came in the middle of this
Oh, okay.
situation. Okay, but my understanding prior to this is that there was a pretty good working relationship with families in the Bureau. Okay, and it's not where it is today. Okay, so it was much better, and I think this situation here has caused a lot of wounds.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Thank you for your time.
Coming and sharing your story. We appreciate it. Jennifer Bertrand. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Senator Pearl and members of the Senate ED&A Committee. My name is Jennifer Bertrand, and I'm from Mount Vernon, New Hampshire. I'm testifying on behalf of myself and my family today. I'm urging the committee excuse me, to support HB 238. I'm a parent, a devoted parent of a now young adult daughter who experiences a significant intellectual and developmental disability. She's served by Gateways Community Services. We have helped to support her as parents in so many ways, above and beyond, even into these adult years, so that she can be productive. She has a little data destruction business. She loves shredding and provides a valuable service to the community. My husband and I provide free services overnight. She still lives at home with us. We provide transportation and contribute in so many ways that go above and beyond any basic services that she does receive. Her disability requires her to have 24/7 support all the time. She's also developed a more serious seizure condition over the last 3 to 4 years. I thought it might be really important to understand a little bit about why the voices of families are so important. The Quality Council is made up of 51% of individuals and or families that are served in the system. People with disabilities, particularly those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, remain the most marginalized and discriminated population. This transcends national cultures, socioeconomic boundaries. Some of the reasons why this particular population is so incredibly vulnerable is because most of them are economically disadvantaged. They experience lower rates of employment and or worse health outcomes than other populations. Much of the public across all societies hold attitudes about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that reflect low expectations of competence, and many people with intellectual and developmental disabilities still experience significant isolation and are at higher risk of abuse. And I'm talking about all aspects of abuse: physical, emotional, sexual, violent crimes. This is why their voices are so important. The intent of this bill is not for the Quality Council to have say-so over anything that the department is doing. When the A&M report came out, when the department decided to evaluate the developmental service system, they just did not include the Quality Council or families like ours about what is needed, where are the barriers, what are the challenges, especially for aging parents. About 80% of adult individuals still live at home with their families. I still get up 2 or 3 times a night for Chloe to resettle her and my husband. We have flexibility to work remotely at home, thank goodness. Otherwise, I'd have to call Gateways and say, you've got to find her a replacement. And I can tell you, no individual or parent wants to, pick out a more segregated, institutionalized setting in order for their family to have the support they need to live their lives, and she would be far less productive, and it's far more costly. The input that families have and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are absolutely critical. So this bill does not supersede the department. It gives it more teeth to ensure that the department is starting with the Quality Council. It's made up of all the stakeholders that are involved with supporting our developmental service system. It really wasn't okay that the department started without the voices and input from families and people and the Quality Council. And there have been issues about when the Quality Council, and it may be because the department is short-staffed, and I agree with previous testimony, there are a lot of well-intentioned, caring people that work at the department, but the council has certain responsibilities that they have to meet. And if they're not provided with information and data in a timely fashion, it's really difficult or impossible for them to be able to do their job. They're the experts about what people need, and they should be given some due deference. And because of what happened around A&M, of course, this bill is to ensure or to help ensure that their voices are heard. So HB 238 really helps to clarify and enhance the role of the Developmental Services Quality Council. It would require the department to solicit input from the council on developmental services systems change before key decisions and recommendations are made by the department or consultants for the department. It really seeks to clarify the department's responsibility to respond to the Quality Council so they have that data and information that they need. And of course, right now we're without a full-time DSP staff. My husband's at home with Chloe. We juggle back and forth all day long. He'll work for a while. I'm with her, supporting her, and vice versa. The other provision in the bill to provide or address accessibility needs so that when necessary, family members or individuals with disabilities who don't have the transportation or they don't have staff to be at home with a family member, that they can access the meetings via Zoom. And there are, requirements around them being engaged in the meeting, being seen, and all of that. So I can't impress upon you enough to support this bill and to pass it. We've already seen that we weren't included at the beginning of this process. There are some serious concerns. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention, I know they talk about, robust stakeholder input. Members of the BDS stakeholder groups report that many of their questions continue to remain unanswered. Their concerns, they feel, are much not addressed. And then as far as like the broader input sessions that they had, for example, there were Zooms where we couldn't see the other families. It wasn't like a Zoom, it was like sort of like a webinar. You can't see anyone else, there's only a chat. And we were told to type questions and comments in the chat. Not only is this a little bit of a challenge for someone who has physical disabilities, but if you have an intellectual disability, that's also difficult. There was one particular session that we signed on to, and I helped to input Chloe's questions, and I mean, there were just a ton of questions. And then when they finally got to the question and the answer section, they're like, oh, you're going to have to retype that. They, just largely not accessible, and again, it just feels like families are not feeling heard, and they're not feeling included. This bill is needed now, and I ask you to support it.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
I also have a letter for you from Kathy Spinney. She served as a Quality Council chair for many years. She's also a parent. She has an adult daughter, Kelly, who's 40 years old, and she explains the importance of this bill and why it's needed as well, and I'll submit that now.
Thank you. Questions? Well, I appreciate you coming in and sharing your story, because you certainly have given us some information to think about, and we appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephanie, sorry, I can't quite, Patrick. Okay, I got it. There you go. Stephanie Patrick.
Thank you so much. My name is Stephanie Patrick, and I'm the chair of the Quality Council. So I have to be able to come up here and just address some of the concerns that were shared by the department earlier and just clarify a few things. So the Quality Council is unique in its role. It was developed back in 2007 after the legislature and administrators and advocates and people with developmental disabilities and their families came together to try to look at the problems with the developmental disability services system. and came up with this idea that we needed a council that was made up of people with disabilities, family members, providers, the area agencies, advocates, the Bureau of Developmental Services, and others to really try to address the concerns and look and make the system better, to make it more quality. So it is unique in that way. There's a number of members that all have various concerns, and I'll tell you, as the chair, we don't always agree. We often come together with disagreements about how things should be handled, what recommendations should be made, and try to work through those and come up with something that is reasonable and workable as we make these recommendations, considering all these different viewpoints. At least 51% of the members are people with disabilities being served by the systems, or parents of family members of individuals served by the system, who I think are critical. They're the ones receiving the services, they're the ones providing many of the services, and so those voices are really important. While I think that some of this was escalated through the concerns around the Alvarez and Marcel contract, I want to make sure that you understand that that is not the only issue that brought this about. I would say I've been on the Quality Council now since 2017, and there have been a number of occasions where we send recommendations to the department and get nothing back for months or years. And so we were not able to really do our work without that information. One of the concerns expressed by the department was the scope of this and whether they would have staff to be able to address the Quality Council concerns. Just want to give you some reality. So last year, the Quality Council sent 4 letters with recommendations to the Department of Health and Human Services. So it wasn't like they were doing this every week or every month or even constantly sending them things and requesting information. There were 4 letters sent. This year, we've sent 3 so far. And I will say that we've sent 4 so far, I'm sorry. So 2 related to rules that the department is considering, and we've been actively engaged with the department in a process to be able to make sure that they understand our recommendations related to those rules and that those are considered through that process. And I would say the department has done exceptionally well in trying to listen to the voice of the Quality Council and considering those recommendations. One was related to training. We did get a response. We're continuing to work with the department on training opportunities and the right kinds of trainings. The last one was related to the use of ARPA funds, which the department provided to the area agencies. We found in our conversations at the council about how these funds were used that they were not distributed equitably throughout the regions. The department provided significant amounts of flexibility in how those funds were used to the area agencies. There's no question, I think, that they followed those rules, but a certain population of people who receive services, the staff who were providing services for those populations, they're called the PDMS families. They're families who hire their own staff. So in some area agencies, the staff of those families were included in these retention bonuses and recruitment bonuses, and others not. And so the only way I think that was even discovered was because the Quality Council took the time to have these discussions. And then we sent a letter to the department that said, if there's additional money available through the ARPA, because you all know we still have money that we are spending, please prioritize these families who are left out in these regions, because we don't understand why their staff who are doing the same difficult, backbreaking work every day, were not able to get those funds. And we sent that recommendation to the department in January. They reached out in the middle of February to ask for some additional information. We've gotten nothing since then. So I don't know what's happening with that recommendation. So that is why we wanted to put the provisions that are in Section 4 regarding the responses to the council within 30 days. I would strongly disagree that this is an undue burden for them to be able to respond when it's 4 letters. It's not like it's hundreds of pages of documents. The other thing I did just want to clarify is that it seemed like there was a significant amount of concern regarding Section 8 of this bill. And we would be okay with removing Section 8 if that does create additional confusion. I think that above that in Section 4, and I'm sorry, my copy doesn't have the line numbers on it, but it's the entirety of Section 8, the last section of the bill. Section 4, regarding input into the contracting and service contracts and consulting contracts, would address, I think, the concerns of the council. What we tried to do in this section, and we did amend it in the House to be able to try to address some concerns, is to provide opportunities for the council to give input to the department. Not that they have to listen to it. They just have to ask and take input that we give. And before they would issue an RFP, and then once they've selected a contractor, once that contractor is doing its work. Once again, it doesn't require the department to do anything that the council says, just that they provide an opportunity for the council to give that kind of input. And it's intended to not be as part of the RFP process, because we do understand that there are significant regulations and rules about how the RFP process happens. We don't want to create a problem with how contracts are being organized. I know that the department regularly asks for input prior to issuing RFPs from potential responders and others. They often do it through an RFI process. I don't think that they have to, but regularly kind of ask people, we're thinking about this, what should we be considering? And that was what we'd ask them to do for the Quality Council also. It could be in whatever format would make it easier. And I'm sure that I would be happy as the current chair, and I'm sure that my colleagues on the council would be happy to hear from them if something is not appropriate. The council does not want to get into the weeds of contracts and try to sway who is chosen for a contract or who is not. That is the responsibility of the department. But we do think that not thinking about the input of families and people with disabilities in this process means that the contracts are not as strong as they could be. And the work of these consultants and contractors who are often being paid millions of dollars to advise the system are not as good as they could be without this kind of input.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. And I just want to recap with you. It's as chair of the Quality Council, you all would be okay with eliminating Section 8, which seems to cause a lot of consternation. So that would be okay. And as for Section, 4, I'm trying to write as fast as you talk.
Sorry.
So within question 4, so there seems to be the issues seem to be very concerned about muddling the RFP process by putting too many fingers into that process. So if I understand correctly, if on page 2, did you say you don't, or you do have the ones with the lines?
I don't, but I have Section 4 right here, so I think
All
I
right,
can follow.
above Section 4, in the reviewing, it's crossed out Section 3. It's a new Section 4. Rather than the word interpreting, would the Quality Council be okay with changing that word to clarifying? So, just a thought. You can mull on that, and we can talk about it later.
The Quality Council is an entity as a whole. I'm doing my best on the fly as I can.
Okay. So within Section 4, what it sounds like this language in Section 4 is intended to, from your group's perspective, create a space for you to be consulted, not a space for you to possibly rewrite or veto contracts, but to be consulted in the development of RFPs. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then additionally, I think there's some heartburn on page 3, lines 1 through 3, requiring the selected contractor to solicit input from the council prior to issuing any findings. Is that also intended to be in a consultant role?
I think we tried to be very careful with the
Okay,
language.
yeah.
To make sure that it just says confer. It doesn't say take. I mean, it's clear. It doesn't require anyone to do anything with the input that they receive. Or we tried to make that clear. That they would ask. And the Quality Council would be given an opportunity. In our process, we meet monthly to provide input back. And then it would be up to the department and the contractors to take that as they will.
Okay, so that Section B is specifically is supposed to be viewed as a consultant role, not a space for the Quality Council to go in and say, not these people, and veto or have any authority in that particular space, but to be heard
Right.
in the
That's-
process.
we tried to-
Okay, I understand.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I'm getting it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Further questions? All right, thank you for testifying.
Thank you.
Matthew. Sorry, Matthew, I can't read your last name. That's okay.
Cordero.
All right. I wouldn't have got that.
You know how all my teachers through my entire life felt. I'm Matthew Cordero. I'm the CEO for One Sky Community Services. I'm one of 10 area agencies. I speak only on behalf of my agency and the 1,250 or so individuals we support over 24 towns. We're based out of Portsmouth. So 238 is exceptionally important, and I can give you, a little background. As Director Santinello had said, 3 pieces of legislation were put forward because people weren't heard and they weren't engaged. I've never met a legislator who knee-jerkly put forward legislation. And in 608, 104 people showed up to testify in favor of it. In fact, the hearing was so long I had to shave again for my next meeting. So when we're talking about how this started, the DHHS commissioner sent an email or a letter to Governor and Council actually asking to contract Marcel and Alvarez because they needed to do that in order to cut costs across the actual system of care. There was no place to cut costs. I'm sure you've all been a part of hearings where people have been told that you'll have individuals living on the front lawn here if we cut costs. Those are all very accurate. And how that all came to be, and when they said, providers and area agencies weren't part of that conversation, there was only 3 voices in that room, and all of which came from DHHS leadership. And they determined how Alvarez and Marcel was going to move forward. So in a nutshell, they gave them recommendations. Those recommendations were then parroted back to BDS and DHHS. They accepted them. And if you want, you can actually go into, I'm part of one of the stakeholder meetings, the rate setting committee, and you can go to the October version. I suggest you grab the YouTube version that I put up, because I had, in order for those videos to be posted, I had to file several, or multiple, I should say, right to know requests, because the intention was not to post those videos. And members of DHHS and Alvarez and Marcel, in the preview of that video, were discussing, and I don't know if they realized the camera was recording or not, but they gave their very candid thoughts on what was going to be going forward and people's reactions. And if you want, I can send you that link. So in dealing with this, people simply were not heard, and the communication hasn't been fixed. To say otherwise is overinflating, or I don't want to use the word disingenuous, but it's definitely gilding the lily. And a great example I can give to that is yesterday our providers, and we found out that DHHS is actually cutting the amount of out-of-bed days for residential programs and the amount of out-of-program days for, they're referred to as CPS services or day service programs, just to make it easier for everyone who's not into the weeds. What that tantamounts to is a 6% decrease for CPS services in revenue and a 2.5% decrease in revenue to our vendor agencies for residential services. In conversations I've had with residential service providers, their response, and I'll share the clean version, their response is that they will very closely look at who they're going to be taking into their residential programs moving forward now. Because if you have an individual who has significant mental health or behavioral issues that results in them being hospitalized for more than 30 days, they will not be paid for any services beyond that. They still have to pay their expenses associated with serving that person, but that revenue is now gone. As far as day program services, they're losing 22 days of services. So if you have an individual who has, let's say, complicated medical issues, and 1 day a week we know that person's going to be absent, they will no longer be invited back to that program because they need to have someone who's essentially steady revenue. So these are the unintended consequences of not talking to your stakeholders. Because if you would talk to us, we would say to you, these are bad ideas. And frankly, I was actually shocked to learn that for $440 million of government spending that we do in our program, on a yearly basis, we don't have a dedicated quality assurance person, blows my mind. There's no other state that would do that. So as we're looking towards all this, you can see how people have been held aside. And I think one of the other communications that's contemporary that demonstrates an issue is that we have 3 waivers that we operate under. And I'm not sure what everyone's understanding of the waiver system is, but under the Social Security Act, 1915C, in order to target a population, you have to get a home and community-based waiver. So our HBC waivers target particular individuals, people with acquired brain disorders, people with developmental disabilities, and then PDMS and in-home supported services. So how those individuals access service is through that waiver that we submit to CMS. They're 275 pages. If you go on DHS's website, they're there. When we received word, it was because that they were amending the waivers. It wasn't because DHHS reached out to us and said, hey, we're changing this. Here's a red line copy of the things that we're changing in this, because that to me would be an example of transparency. We found out because someone read a newspaper in Nashua. So that was published on Sunday, and then the response from DHHS was, we publicly posted it. That's not a version of a partner. So to say that we have partners at the Bureau is disingenuous. I'm going to stick with that. It is disingenuous. And I may not get another contract again. God willing, we will. But I want to make sure that we come here with a very clear picture of what is going on and how this is. So this law, or this potential law, is necessary. And it's necessary in the fact that we're just asking to be at the table. We don't want to be at the kids' table. We want to be at the table. And what's happening right now, and to hear, we don't know how we'd respond to them. We don't have the labor to do it. Collaboration is difficult. You're all legislators. I guarantee you have to compromise on a daily basis. It's not fun, is it? It's terrible. Everyone wants to win. But at the end of the day, collaboration is difficult, and we do it so we can all win together. What we're dealing with right now is a one-size-fits-all, whether it fits you or not. And I sat through the earlier hearing and listening to garments for individuals experiencing menstruation. I can't imagine my opinion on that is even remotely worthwhile. It's not something I deal with, so who cares? And that's what's going on here. The opinion of the people who are actually managing the organized care system, the people providing the services, and the people receiving the services have been completely cut out. And there's a lot of change that's going on in our system that, from my perspective, and I only have 20 years of doing this in a lot of different states, working in juvenile justice, mental health services, other long-term supported services. I have an MBA and I'm trained as a behavior analyst. So I might have some knowledge here, but it's one of those things where there's a lot of change that's going on that we don't need to do that is directly tied to Alvarez and Marsal's. So to hear that, we're pumping the brakes on that, but we're rewriting all of our rules and our regulations for what may come is again, another disingenuous statement. So, and when last thing I'll leave is when I've put forth right to know requests, I had to get an outside attorney to help us get the information we requested. And I can't say we got all the information requested, but I can tell you that some of the information I requested were labeled drafts. So we have no access to that. And everything, lo and behold, wouldn't you know it, is a working draft. So we don't have access to it. So I can do a right to know request. I can go and I can parade myself up and down the hallway. And I might do that actually. But we don't have access to it. So how do we know what's coming next? And when you're dealing with an entire system of care, managing $440 million, supporting close to 12,000 people, and I would say that's probably a large portion of our economy, and employing thousands of employees over multiple companies, how do we operate and exist in turmoil? How do we know who to hire, when to hire, what to hire at? How do we know when to fire? How do we reorganize? What we need to do? What systems we need to buy? These are all questions that I will leave you with because they're what keep me up at night. And that's really it. I apologize. I'm not as articulate as the other individuals. I'm just bald. So
thank you for your testimony. Questions? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, nice
Yeah. Thanks for coming up. When the, I'm going to go back to, so when the stakeholder sessions started to be held, these 205 different stakeholder sessions that were done with families and providers, was One Sky included?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Have you
so
participated in those?
in order to participate in those, we had to write a survey or an essay as to why we support the changes. I wrote mine in such a way that it was completely neutral. So if you read it one way or the other, it was neutral, because I knew they wouldn't put me on otherwise. But the stakeholder meetings are highly scripted and very choreographed. So once we get off topic, particularly me, we're told we're not talking about that, we're moving on to something else. If you ask a question and they don't want to answer it, they just say, that's a good question, we'll get back to that, and then we never get back to it. Questions aren't answered. They just pile up. And the problem is, we're not asking questions to be obstructive or to be difficult. We're trying to manage a system of care that, I mean, I look at this as reasonable and foreseeable and avoidable harm that can come to people. And that's really what it is. And I think the state needs to be put on notice that some of the things that they're doing are going to cause economic harm to businesses and have them close. And we're not talking like a private equity firm not getting 40% on a dollar or to down to 25 cents on a dollar. You're talking about nonprofits that are operating already with net losses that they have to fundraise to overcome. So when I talk about my region, I talk about 37 people who are now going to receive cuts totaling $60,000, just my region. So when you talk about you know, those things, they have impact on people's lives. That means that they may not receive the care they need, they may go without supervision, or it just might be, as a great example, one of my board members, Michelle Schladenhoffen, is an individual who sits on my board. Cognitively not impaired, physically needs a lot of support. She has her own artistry business. Honestly, she's one of my personal heroes. If there's a challenge in front of her, she finds a way to get over it, up it, around it, or through it. But you know, those are the people who are going to go without staffing, and then they lose their independence, and they go from having an apartment where they're caring for themselves, they're supplementing their income, to now they're effectively drawing $200,000 to $300,000 annually for residential support. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot for a short-term gain. And for the life of me, I haven't been able to figure out what the gain is, other than it makes managing the system administratively easier for a handful of people at the state. And that might be the goal. It really might be the goal. But at the end of the day, I can't say that with any assurity. But I can tell you that the Alvarez and Marcel report, someone much smarter than I am at math told me that, and this needs to be fact-checked because it might be wrong, that the Marcel's report's going to save approximately $200,000. Now, we spent $20 million for that number. So in 100 years, we'll have an ROI that balances itself. And that's not factoring out the time value of money. So because of inflation, I'm sure it'll be 140 years. So these are the things that, have they consulted with the Quality Council, which sits on there, has members of the area agencies, the vendor agencies, the families. If they just consulted with them and them alone, some of these things would have been avoided. And this idea that they've brought in some of the previous work from the few years, I reviewed all that work. I didn't see much that was brought in. What was brought in was all technology-based. We need better technology in our system, without question. We are working on antiquated stuff. The area agencies aren't, the providers aren't, but the state actually is. You know, I have a $150,000 SaaS system for my accounting. I can pull data. If you send me an email, I can pull it within 20 minutes. The state was working off of Excel sheets. So I don't know how you do that without a magic wand, but that's a lot of work. It's labor intensive.
Well, thank you, Matthew. We appreciate you coming in
Thank
and
you.
testifying today.
Thank you. Have a good
Alex.
I know you've been here a long time, so I'll be about 2 minutes, I promise.
All right.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Alex Katrubis. I'm here representing CSNI, or the Association of the 10 Area Agencies that provide services and support individuals with developmental disabilities and acquired brain disorder. There's about 12,000 individuals in our state. In terms of this committee, the agencies in your district are Northern Human Services, One Sky, you just heard from, Community Bridges, and the Moore Center. By way of background, developmental services is a major component of the DD budget. It's about 14% of their budget overall. It's about 6% of the state budget overall. And as you've heard from several speakers this morning, several years ago, DHHS retained a national consultant to conduct major system change work at the department. A major focus, although as you heard, and I agree, not an exclusive focus, developmental services was one of the areas that was looked at with intense scrutiny. The area agencies were not opposed to that work. However, the timing of that effort and the lack of communication and coordination with another system change that was already underway and continues to be underway caused a lot of confusion and stress, and not only for providers, but families and individuals and other stakeholders in the system. It also caused a lot of friction between the department and the area agencies. And the work that was already underway before the consultant was hired was mandated by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. New Hampshire needed to and still needs to change the way that providers are allowed to bill under Medicaid for developmental services, and to ensure that case management in the DD system is conflict-free. And the area agency position is that the sole focus of DHHS and other stakeholders should have been on compliance with these CMS mandates. And any consulting work that the department engaged with should have been focused on assisting with that federal compliance first and foremost. That unfortunately did not happen, and as you heard, the consultant focused on many other areas that we think are worthy of exploration. But again, the timing of that work, at the same time we're under this corrective action plan, was really confusing and I think harmful. When the consulting work was completed, a report was produced, as you heard, recommendations were released, and then there was an effort, after the recommendation and report was released, then there was an effort to seek input from the stakeholders. And again, as you've heard, a major concern was the Quality Council, which really represents virtually all of the DD system stakeholders or members of that council. They were not consulted while these recommendations were being formulated. So you had a consultant come in to make recommendations to the developmental services system. They didn't talk to anyone who was a recipient of service or provider of service before they released the recommendations. Now, to be fair, they are doing that now, but it really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way that they didn't do that before they released the report. And yes, we are only asking to be consulted. We're asking for a voice, not a veto in the process. Looking forward, because all this is, it's in the past at this point, we have to look forward. We have to get into compliance with CMS. We have to move forward. I believe that there's a recognition by the department staff, the key staff, that there were some missteps here. I believe there's a commitment to try and correct some of these issues, although I do agree with One Sky. There's still a lot of issues that need to be sorted out. We are now squarely focused on the CMS compliance issue, so I think that's a really positive step. However, we do need to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again, and that's really what this bill is about. As you've heard, it's an attempt to ensure that we have those stakeholders, those families, the providers, the individuals who actually receive services at the table. Speaking for the area agencies, we're certainly open to any amendments. So if the chair and the committee is willing to let us work with the department, I'm happy to help spearhead that. If we want to look at Section 8 and remove that, that's certainly not a deal breaker for the area agencies. And if there's other changes that we can make, I mean, we have to make this work for the department, because as you know, they're going to be the ones implementing this law. So we need them to be as comfortable as we can, but at the same time try to maintain the spirit and the intent of the bill. So sorry if I went a little longer, but hopefully you found that useful to your efforts on this bill. So we really appreciate it and thank Representative McMahon for bringing it forward for your consideration.
Thank you, Alex. Any questions? Seeing none, we appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I have two other folks that signed in favor, Jean and Archibald, and Caitlin, not sure of the last name on that one. Katab, there you go. Anybody else who wishes to speak? Seeing none, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 238. All right, we're going to open the hearing on House Bill 228, and we will recognize Representative Schmidt. Are you going to introduce?
Well, since I'm in opposition to the bill.
No, oh, that's right, you're in the opposition,
May
I'm
be
sorry.
inappropriate for me.
That is true. We don't have Rep. Griffin here, okay.
I think you have to have one of your colleagues.
We'll have one of our colleagues do it, thank you. And then I'll call you next.
I have no doubt.
Would you like to do it? You're doing such a great job.
My opportunity to meet Senator Gendro in action. Nice to meet you.
Senator Gendro.
So for the record, my name is Senator Gendro, District 1, and I'm here to introduce House Bill 228. It is relative to repealing the Commission on Demographic Trends. This bill repeals the statutory reference to the Commission on Demographic Trends.
Thank you. Representative Schmidt. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Senate ED&A Committee. For the record, my name is Peter Schmidt. I represent Dover Ward 1, which is Stratford 14. And I'm here today in opposition, strong opposition, to House Bill 228, which I'd like to begin my testimony by asking how many of you have a strip of tape over the gas gauge on your car? And you would probably agree that that would be a somewhat senseless or contrary action to take, since the gas gauge is there to tell you what your future driving range is going to be without refilling your tank. And I could give you lots of other analogies of this nature, like taking batteries out of your smoke detector and so forth. But I apologize. I tried to email the committee the remarks I made to the House, that I sent to my House colleagues, and when this bill came before us. But unfortunately, my system doesn't let me send emails by clicking on your email the entire committee. So I sent one to Senator Altshuler and one to Senator Carson, I believe, because I had their emails in my system. But the bottom line here is that the repeal bill that you see before you, it has one sponsor, Representative Griffin, who is also the chair, as I understand it, of the said commission. He appeared before the House ED&A Committee, on which I serve, a couple of weeks ago with his bill. And I had the privilege about 15 years ago of hearing a presentation by one of New Hampshire's former residents, who was also a nationally recognized demographer. I found it extraordinarily interesting and helpful with regard to things that touch on our state in significant ways. And the reality is that, as many of you, and perhaps all of you know, we have the second oldest population in the nation. That has real implications for what the legislature needs to plan for and things that it needs to be aware of in order to be able to plan and act and legislate wisely. It would involve things like school funding, retirement, the economy, and so forth, all kinds of things. Virtually every aspect of New Hampshire's life is impacted by the population it has and where that population is going. Now, I am reliably informed, because Representative Griffin testified to it when he was before my committee, our committee, that New Hampshire, University of New Hampshire, has an excellent department of demography. That's all to the good, but it's of no benefit to us if we're paying no attention, which is what the Commission on Demographic Trends does. Now, Representative Griffin also testified that he was having problems getting a quorum. So that suggests that perhaps some action on his part to encourage different members, appointment of more members, whatever, might be in order. But the bottom line is repealing the Commission on Demographic Trends is basically to put a sack over our head here in the legislature with regard to what the trends indicate for New Hampshire. And the fact that we have an excellent department at the university does not benefit us if we're not paying any attention to it. And so the idea of repealing the commission, I think, is extremely unwise. But the House vote, if you look at it, was overwhelming. But the House, both parties in the House went along with the recommendations of the House eDNA Committee, which is made up of a number of people who have not been there too long. I think there's only one or two of them. There's long in tooth and long in service, as I am. And so if they're not familiar with demography and so forth and so on, they could be misled by the chairman's testimony with regard to the fact that he was having a problem with quorum. That's no reason to close our eyes to what's happening in New Hampshire. I happen to, in an analogous situation, I happen to serve on the Assessing Standards Board for the last, 18 years or so. And one of the benefits of serving on there is that when issues involving assessing standards come up, the fact that there are four members, 2 senators, 1 Republican, 1 Democratic, and 2 House members, 1 Republican, 1 Democratic, that to the degree that we have this membership, when an issue comes up and we suggest legislation or any action in response to that development, we have people who can come before the House and the Senate as colleagues, but also say, I serve on the Assessing Standards Board, here's why this is a problem, and here's what we ought to do about it, and so forth. Well, something analogous also is the case with the Commission on Demographic Trends. So I strongly urge you not to adopt this bill because we can't really wisely deprive ourselves of the information that they can do, not because they have to develop it, they only have to pay attention to what they're doing over at the university. So thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
So Representative, do you know, has this commission ever met? Do you know if the commission has ever met?
I don't know whether the commission has ever met because Representative Griffin has only been in the legislature for a couple of terms. So his history with the commission would be probably not very indicative of what the commission. The commission was readopted, as I understand it, a couple of years ago, but it was not brand new.
Oh, okay.
It was not brand new at that time. It was only readopted. And the very fact that the legislature adopted such a commission, whether recently or previously, indicates that we thought that it was a wise idea to have this guidance in terms of policy development.
Yeah, it looks like it was effective August 30th of 22, so it hasn't even been in a year, or at least reinstated for a year.
Right. Well, if the commission was only recently initially adopted, then the fact that we would be jumping right back out of it without it ever having an opportunity to benefit us would be equally, senseless in my opinion.
Well, that was kind of my concern. That's why I was asking.
Right.
Thank you. Further questions? Senator Altshuler, did you have?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Schmidt, for bringing the details of this to our attention. If I remember correctly, was our good friend who is now a resident of, I think, Pennsylvania, Peter Francis, part of the push to really take the demographic changes in New Hampshire seriously in a way that will inform policy by putting this commission together in the first place.
Well, if I heard you correctly, did you represent Peter did you
Peter Francis,
refer
yes,
Peter Francis? He's the demographer that I
yes.
heard about 15 years ago. He spoke over at the Tuck Library to a packed house. Now, I have to admit that lunch was served. I'm sure it's not a revelation to any of you. I've been in the House, as two of you have, Senator Carson as well, but when she was here, that if you want the legislature to show up, it's wise to feed us. But anyway, the point is that was a packed house, and it was an absolutely fascinating presentation. And Peter Francis, whom I got to know because his wife Paula was in the house with some of us for a while, and very delightful person. But Peter he had written several books on the subject, and he was widely recognized as a real authority. So hearing what he had to say was very illuminating and instructive. And I would suggest that whether we go forward with this bill or not, which I hope you will not do, it would be wise, I think, to have one of the UNH demographers come over and give us another presentation, even without lunch, because this is not the kind of thing that we ought to be, putting the blinders on and then saying, I don't see anybody here. Well, take your hand away and you will see people.
Further questions? Well, thank you for coming in.
You're more than welcome. And lots of luck with the other bills that I
Appreciate it.
heard you wrestling with this morning. Thank you.
So I have Representative McGuire signed up to speak, but I don't see her here. Anybody else that would like to speak on this bill? Neither of you two would like? All right, well, with that, we will close the hearing on House Bill 228. I had contemplated executing at least one bill today, but Senator Carson is not returned, and we're not under the gun to do it, because originally I thought they were holding the calendar, but they are not any longer, so we're under no pressure, so we're not going to exec anything today. So with that, we are done. Have a great afternoon.
Yeah, you too.